When you look at a map of the European Union, you'll notice something strange. Its longest land border is in Europe, it's in the Amazon jungle, between France and Brazil. So how does France still own land in South America? You'd expect former empires to have let go of faraway colonies by now. Britain, Spain, Portugal lost their overseas possessions. So why is France still here in the 21st century, flying the French flag in the tropics? Well, French Guiana isn't a colony anymore, but it's also not independent. It's technically part of France itself, which means Europe has a border deep in South America, and it's not going away anytime soon. So why doesn't France just cut its losses and move on? Or why doesn't French Guiana just declare independence if it wants to be free? Well, both answers take us back in time to the early days of colonization. In the early 1600s, France started exploring and claiming parts of South America. But it quickly found itself in a three-way race with the Portuguese and Dutch to see who could claim and conquer the interior jungle. At the time, having a river port was crucial for trade and war, and the area around the mouth of the Amazon had the perfect spot. But while France and its providers did manage to sail up the Amazon and defeat some of the Portuguese, they couldn't hold on to anything inland. So eventually they were left with just the coastal region we now call French Guiana. But this small stretch of land wasn't super valuable in itself. For decades it remained relatively empty, sparsely populated by indigenous people and a few European settlers. That changed when Napoleon started losing wars in the early 1800s and needed somewhere to send his political prisoners. He chose French Guiana, specifically 3 islands in the Caribbean off the coast called the Isles du Salut, or Salvation Islands. But it quickly became clear that the islands weren't really fit for the purpose. They were tiny, hot, humid, and full of deadly creatures, so they were nicknamed the Devil's Islands. The prison camp on them would become infamous for its extreme brutality, with thousands dying under the tropical sun. After Napoleon fell and the French monarchy was restored, the island's reputation for cruelty continued. Prisoners, many of whom had committed no crime other than opposing the government, were forced to work long hours cutting down trees and clearing the jungle. Most died within months from hard labor, starvation, or disease. But in 1852, the French government decided to use the whole territory as a penal colony instead of just the islands. So it took over the entire coast as well and used the prisoners to start farms and plantations. This era of French Guiana's history is so infamous that even today, it's known locally as Le Temps des Forcats, or convict times. It continued until 1953, when the camp was finally shut down. By then, French Guiana was no longer about punishment and exile, but about potential prosperity. In 1946, after the devastation of World War II, France was busy restructuring its remaining empire. It had already lost most of its colonies in Asia and Africa, and what was left in South America was in danger of being taken by its neighbors. So rather than trying to run it as a penal colony, France made it an official part of metropolitan France. It became an overseas department, legally the same as Paris or Marseille. And in 1970, it was given the same flag as mainland France, although it still uses a slightly modified version to this day. So today, when you visit French Guiana, you're visiting France. You'll need a French passport to enter. You'll use the Euro vote in French elections and follow French law. It's essentially a department of France located 7,000 kilometers away. This makes French Guiana one of the most unusual places on Earth. It has year-round summer weather, but celebrates French holidays like Bastille Day and May 1st. There are McDonald's and Sephora stores, but also deadly vipers and biting ants. People vote in French presidential elections, but have little say in local politics. While technically part of the European Union, it doesn't really feel like Europe. The nearest neighbor is Brazil, a country with whom it shares a 5,000 kilometers border. And yet French Guiana feels closer to Paris than Brasilia. The only way to get there from France is by a 7-hour flight through the night. Locals don't speak Portuguese, but French, although with a heavy accent and jungle-inspired slang. And despite being in the heart of the Amazon, capital Cayenne looks more like a provincial town in France than a Latin American city. To sum up, French Guiana is kind of like French, but in South America. So if it's not a colony and it's not independent, then what exactly is it? Well, think of it as a fancy overseas province. It's ruled directly by France, but still sends representatives to the European Parliament. And while it isn't allowed to form its own diplomatic relations, France usually represents its interests anyway. In fact, the only place in the EU where this arrangement causes problems is the border with Brazil. Sometimes Brazilian prospectors illegally cross into French Guiana to mine for gold, or smugglers use the jungle tracks to move their products. The French see these people as outsiders trespassing in their territory. The Brazilians see them as neighbors just looking to improve their lives. Overall, it's a pretty stable border. France's Guiana has a population of just 300,000 people, and huge parts of the territory remain completely wild and uninhabited. But occasionally there are tensions. In 2021, for instance, the French government announced plans to close the border officially, make entry into French Guiana require a visa, and check all goods coming from Brazil. The reason? Stop illegal gold mining, which was becoming a serious problem. Brazil responded by threatening to do the same. And while things didn't escalate further, it was a reminder of the unique situation along this border. Only one EU country borders another sovereign state, France and Brazil, and that border goes deep into the South American continent. So what will happen to this oddity in the future? Will France ever leave? Well, it probably won't. The current government relies heavily on funding from mainland France, and while locals protest regularly against high taxes, expensive imports, and poor infrastructure, leaving would likely be even worse. French Guiana does have some economic potential. Its location on the equator and proximity to the spaceport makes it attractive for scientists and researchers. But overall, it's still heavily dependent on France. In fact, around 40% of the budget comes from transfers from mainland France. And with few jobs, much of the population struggles with poverty. Around 30% of people live below the poverty line, and youth unemployment can be as high as 50%. And while the spaceport brings in some money, most of it leaves again with the companies that run it. In short, French Guiana needs France, just like any other overseas territory. But this means the European Union also needs French Guiana. The Guiana Space Center is Europe's primary rocket launch site. From this location, rockets take advantage of the Earth's rotation to add speed to their launches, meaning they need less fuel. The French government has spent millions upgrading it in recent years, aiming to handle 25 launches per year. So for now, it's unlikely France will give up its tropical spaceport. And beyond economics, it's also a question of prestige. French Guiana is a relic of an earlier age, a time when European countries carved up the world between themselves. While the United States and Australia still have overseas territories, France is the only European country left with a colony. If you're a French person, it might be hard to let go. French Guiana is a vital piece of French identity. And for better or for worse, it will continue to be France forever. If you enjoyed this episode, stay tuned for more stories of weird geography. In the meantime, here's one you might have missed. Why does Spain still own 2 Caribbean islands?